Hello, once again, everyone, and welcome to the Legal Power Hour. Minutes of thought-provoking discussion into a 30-minute show. Inform, awaken, and protect our fellow American citizens. Host Tom Scott and Sarah Nahidi. We are delighted to have with us Mr. Brent Hamacheck, owner and political and economic commentator. Welcome once again to our show, Brent. It's great to have you back.
It's nice to be back. It's always nice to be invited back somewhere because the first time nobody knows. The second time means they must have not found your company too boorish or awful. So nice to be invited back. Thanks.
Thank you for being back here.
So last time you were on the show, we spoke at length about culture in the United States, and prior to being on the air, problems that we have in the system. If you would, Brent, could you, and this is important, I'm going to tell our viewers right now, this material that Brent is about to discuss with us this is something that, you know, the country has to really tune into and understand what's going on. Slippery slope here with regard to laws that are being passed and everything else. Could you give us your perspective on things as you see it, Brent?
Yeah, well, I've been concerned for quite some time with regard to the way the legal system is being used by people in what I'll call a weaponized sort of manner. I'll go way back in time to somewhere around 2006 or so. And I remember I was having a conversation with a dear friend of mine who's a contemporary in age, and he was being very, very excited about some of the executive orders that were being issued by then President Bush. And he liked what the content was. He appreciated the fact that Bush couldn't get the laws passed in Congress. And he said, so this is the way it has to be done. And I said, well, I get what you're saying in terms of what he's trying to accomplish, but be careful because he's setting a precedent and somebody's going to follow him that maybe you're not quite so fond of. And the use of these executive orders is going to turn around and be used in a way that you're not going to like. And of course, that's exactly what happened. And several years later, he and I were on the phone again with him saying, you were right, I was wrong. And we watched what happened with executive orders during the Obama administration. Our founding fathers, in putting together the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, prohibited the passing of what are called ex post facto laws. And those are laws that are written after an event's already taken place to then make the event illegal retroactively. And of course, the reason that they did that is having lived under a monarchy and having been able to see firsthand the abuses of what we'll call totalitarianism, for lack of any better word to use, good general term, the forcefully imposed rule of law over a people, they wanted to make sure that somebody couldn't capriciously and whimsically pass a law to just get even with a political or personal enemy or with a whole group of people. So it was a really, really good idea. And while today that part of our Constitution still lives, so we can't pass ex post facto laws, what we are seeing is a similar effective use of law in terms of taking statutes, taking common law, taking rules and regulations, and applying them in a way that allows people to effectively punish their adversaries, people they don't agree with, and to use the law as a weapon. You know, originally our founding fathers were fairly strict. They talked a lot about the things government couldn't do, and to the extent that we were passing laws, they were really limited to the bare minimum to protect life, liberty, and property. Well, we've gone far beyond that. And now I worry with things that I see happening currently in this country that the law is no longer being seen as a way to protect us, but it's being used as a tool to punish us.
So, now we had spoken too about selective enforcement. I mean, that's kind of touches on what you said, right? And you also asked the investigation by Mueller as well that you mentioned prior to this conversation.
Right. There's different sides to this. On the one hand, it's taking law and using it for whatever purpose that you might contrive, whether it fits or not, in order to get somebody or some group. On the other side of that is taking a law that plainly exists, that's crystal clear in terms of what it requires, and then simply choosing not to enforce it. Both of those things end up accomplishing exactly the same thing. What you're really telling regular citizens is, when they take a look at a law and they decide based on what it says what they can or can't do, over time they start to realize that might not necessarily be the case. And they start to have a sense of, what does the law actually mean? And they begin to fear its ambiguity. They begin to fear the fact that they're not going to be able to rely on it if they need it. And we live in a there's a very fine line in between civil order and chaos and anarchy. And that line hinges to a large extent on the fairness of laws and the reliability of laws, and on people's ability to be able to count on them being applied, and when they are applied fairly. You know, the Mueller investigation is just, I mean, it's fascinating. So there's all sorts of people out there that just, you know, they don't like Donald Trump. I get that. I happen to be a Donald Trump fan. Okay, I have been since March of 2015. So I'm a big believer in what he's trying to accomplish for reasons that transcend the topic of this show. But I get people that don't like him. So since they don't like him, they want to get him. And I don't just mean people in power, I mean people in the general population. So what we have then is we have a special prosecutor who, if you look at the special prosecutor statute, what it's supposed to be required to appoint one, what's required, this investigation just plain doesn't qualify. Period. End of story. It doesn't qualify. Mueller was not appointed to investigate a specific crime. So there's a bunch of folks out there, of course, saying, don't you dare fire him, don't you dare terminate this, you do so, doing so will indicate that you're attempting to cover things up. On the other hand, if this were reversed, those same people would feel quite differently. And what people need to be aware of is that whether you like Donald Trump or you don't, whether you like a particular person or group or don't, shouldn't matter when you're looking at the application of law to go after that person or group, because that can always be turned around and used against you, your neighbor, or your you know, a family member. And so I think the Mueller piece is classic. You want to turn around then and look at it the other way. We had 8 years under the Obama administration, which I was not a fan, where they simply took existing immigration laws and chose not to enforce them. You hear people make the argument sometimes, they say, we need to do something about immigration. And the response oftentimes is by people, well, we actually don't need to do much, we just need to enforce the laws that are on the books. Guess what? That's mostly true. There's enough laws on the books for us to be able to shut down the illegal immigration problem, but we're choosing not to do that. Our politicians are choosing not to do that. And so I don't care where you are on the immigration side of things. That's not the point. The point is the capricious and inconsistent application of law and how that destabilizes a free society that depends on laws and creates a general disregard. I mean, does that make sense? Those are the two sides of this thing. There's a million other examples. Those are just two I chose to use to illustrate.
I mean, I think it makes sense. And, you know, Tom and I have discussed the fact that laws and the way they're interpreted and applied to people, it's too subjective in our legal system in the United States. So my question to you, Brent, is what what are the changes that need to be made or can be made by people or the system? Because we know there's selective enforcement. We know it's subjective. We've all been a part of it and seen it, experienced it, lived it. But what's the solution is my question.
Well, it's a disturbing question. History tells us that once mankind develops a weapon to use to their benefit against their enemies, they virtually never relinquish that weapon voluntarily and unilaterally. So now that people have come to an understanding, and in particular, and I really mean, in particular, government power structures, whether it's the state and governor's office in Illinois, or whether it's the federal government in Washington, they've discovered this ability to weaponize and use law to accomplish what they want to and need to get done or not do. So the reversal of that, of course, the answer to the question on some level is almost rhetorical. The only way to reverse it is by the people forcing it to be reversed. The problem is just how little control real citizens have anymore over impacting change in government, because seemingly no matter who gets elected, we wind up having the same laws and the same behavior take place, just exercised differently by one side or another. I'll give you an example of something proximate. Governments exist at all levels, and in the town where I live, I won't go into specifics, but I will tell you in general that the school board in the community is about to set into place a series of reforms and policies that apparently a vast majority of the members of the community, certainly a solid majority, are against. And yet, those folks are going to do it. Now, that's not what I'm talking about in terms of the use and application of law, but it is what I'm talking about in terms of this sense of non-responsiveness. So people elect people, they make their preferences known, and then those preferences are ignored by the very people they elect. And once you step into the world of law enforcement, it only gets worse because nobody directly elects those people. So it makes it more complicated to unwind it. But only citizen demands and standing up and demanding a change is going to make it take place. But it has to be sustained, prolonged, and nearly universal. Short of that, it'll continue.
And you've hit on a few things that we write about in our book and we've blogged about. The number of laws in this country. We've got a bare bones minimum of 1 million laws, probably closer to 2 to 3 million. We can prove the existence of at least 1 million of them, which opens the door to corruption, selective enforcement, and all these other things. And as you said before, the people in power have plenty of laws to choose from. They just choose to ignore them. We don't have to have new immigration laws. We don't have to have all these other new laws. And we've also blogged about, what you just stated about, not being able to as our police force, or as many in many states, they're judges, they're district attorneys, prosecutors, if you will. So that's a major problem. We see those as major problems. Bigger government, less control. This going down this rabbit hole spiral that unless somebody throws out the anchor, the parachute, if you will, we're going to keep accelerating.
Yeah, it's not just big government. It's the problem. It's malicious and arbitrary government that's big. That's the problem. Turn this and look at it a slightly different way. We've gotten to the point now where our court system, we see this in my business life and with my law firm that I work with closely, where we partner together. We see judges making rulings on a regular basis that ignore the Uniform Commercial Code, that ignore contracts as they're written, that ignore existing collection regulations of taxes, say by the state of Illinois. We see this regularly. You take it up to a bigger level. Let's, for fun, let's talk about when Obamacare went into the Supreme Court. Of course, if you go back to when Obamacare was passed, one of the reasons that it was put through, it was sold to the American people, is that it's not a tax. This is something that is related to safeguarding the public health, permissible act of government, interstate commerce, and so on. So when they go to the Supreme Court, and of course, a lot of people had done a lot of pretty thorough work to show that there were some clear elements of Obamacare that simply weren't constitutional. So what does Justice Roberts do in his opinion? He basically says, well, Obamacare is okay because it's a tax. So think about this. This is now like when we wait for a court to rule on an issue, we can no longer sit down ahead of time, understand the law, understand the circumstances, understand the facts of the case, and then say, well, this is what the court's likely to do. Instead, we wait for court decisions almost like you're watching an exciting sporting event. We have no idea what the outcome will be. It's thrilling to wait to see. It's up in the air. Anything can happen. When David Tyree made his famous catch in the Super Bowl that kept the New York Giants alive a handful of years ago, and they beat the then unbeaten New England Patriots. This was the most unfathomable, miraculous, unpredictable thing that could have happened. One of the great moments in sports. Roberts' decision was pretty similar. There was no way to see Tyree's catch coming, and there was no way to see that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was going to defend Obamacare by saying it was a tax when we had been told for years prior it was not a tax. This simply isn't possible, and yet it happened. So if we're going to turn the interpretation of law by courts into an exciting sporting event upon which you can wager, we have lost all of our ability to consistently predict how to act because we don't know what a court's going to do. How are we supposed to survive in civilized society that way?
And it's so interesting you say that, Brent, because every time I have a litigation client, I tell them, I said, once this gets into court, I said, we've lost all control. I will do my best to make sure that we can prevail, but it is so subjective and it is so unpredictable that we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I'm always relaying stories with Tom about, surprises that happen because there's always a surprise once you get
I have a family member at the moment dealing with a family court issue, and the advice and commentary that we get from the attorney all along through this process is, well, you never know what a judge will do. It depends on what judge we get. They can do some pretty interesting things here. They can do some pretty crazy things here. This is a very big deal. It's okay to say to your kids, I don't know what grandma's going to be like when we get there today. She could be in one of her moods. All right? If she is, you say it's grandma, you watch TV in the other room, and you leave when you leave. But we can't be saying to citizens, we don't know what will happen. We don't know how the law will be enforced. It depends on the judge. This one's a little crazy. They could do anything. That is not what our founding fathers had in mind. And this idea that somehow or other we're just allowing this to happen to us, thinking that, well, it's just the way things are. Well, it's not the way things were designed. It is not the way it was supposed to be. We were supposed to keep law simple: life, liberty, and property. We were supposed to use the law to just protect people. That's simple stuff. You can do that mostly well most of the time if you're a sane, rational mind and a decent soul. But now that we've built so many laws, and now that we've crossed the line in terms of saying, well, we'll use them when they suit us, we won't when they don't. Once we've crossed that line, all hell breaks loose. And my fear is that You know, Bastiat wrote a long time ago about this idea of bad law breeding contempt for law, bad law leading people to not be willing to follow the law and even be justified in not doing so. These warnings for us are centuries old. And that's the place we've stepped into now. So people start to say, well, if people are going to enforce laws the way they want or not enforce them the way they want, then maybe I'll obey the ones I want. And maybe I won't obey the ones I don't want. And maybe we'll just see what happens. And that's not the way to hold together a free society. You can go ahead and hold together a totalitarian society that way because the government can put its foot on your throat whenever it needs to. But free people need simple and clear rules. Emphasis on simple and clear. And absent those, we start to lose our structure.
Our legal system is anything but simple and clear. I mean, there's so many laws and rules on the books that people don't even know of. I mean, you break the law all the time and don't even know it because you're just unaware of it. There's too many laws. There's too many laws. And we talk about that in our book as being a huge problem. And I know you agree with us, Brent. So it's like, you know, we've proposed the fact that anytime a legislator writes a new law, they should take, you know, at least one or more off the books. I mean, we just need to simplify things, but the longer our country has existed, the further it's become overly complicated, overly regulated, and it's just too much. It's gone too far.
Yeah, it's one of the principles of with regard to regulation that Donald Trump ran on was if you want to pass one new regulation, you have to get rid of two. Look, my wife likes to be critical of me for having too many T-shirts. I suspect she's right. I'm a bit of a T-shirt collector. So I adopted a rule a little while ago that said, okay, I'll still collect T-shirts, but for every one I get, I'll get rid of two. It works for my closet, and I don't have as many T-shirts as we have regulations. So I think that we could probably reasonably pull that off. But, you know, to stay with current events a little bit and to understand just how pervasive and obvious this is, when you look at the totality of what we know, of what's been thoroughly researched, documented, proven, and shown, and I hate to make this sound like it's a partisan thing, but it's just that the examples are teeing themselves up that way. But we can take a look at what went on with the Clintons before, during, and after the campaign. Look at the incredible body of evidence that suggests wrongdoing, and yet nothing. And to any reasonable person, if you take a look at all of that, from the FBI's involvement, from the Comey being instructed on how to turn the investigation by Loretta Lynch after her meeting with Clinton, and all of those things, for a regular person to look at that, if they take the time to look, they have to say, what on earth is going on? What can I count on? We call the FBI, you know, the greatest law enforcement group on earth. They have this incredible reputation dating back decades. And yet now, I mean, can either one of you tell me for sure what the FBI would or wouldn't investigate? And can either one of you tell me for sure that the FBI wouldn't open an investigation against you simply for sport because somebody close to them politically said you probably should? That can't happen. It simply can't happen. And we've gotten to the point where we say, well, that's the way government is, or, well, you know, you just, you know, that's the power structure, or whatever we might say to try to dismiss it and make it feel like we can't do anything about it. But we are losing our liberty and our security against losing our liberty. The protections against losing our liberty, we're losing them by the moment. And people just don't, I think in general, stop to understand how serious this is.
I think also the rise of the surveillance state has a lot to do with what you said, Brent, that any one of us, if we, you know, got on the wrong side of somebody politically connected could be targeted. I mean, we've got Big Brother watching us all the time. There's no privacy. So, I mean, I think that's a big problem. The fact that we have no privacy and we're constantly being watched.
Well, and it's interrelated in this sense. Would anybody mind in a hypothetical Shangri-La type world that doesn't exist? Would anybody mind if we were being watched? I don't mean in our our bedroom, but would anybody mind if we were being watched all the time if we knew that as long as we weren't doing something wrong against a few basic laws to protect safety, nothing would happen to us? I don't know that I would mind. It'd be fine with me. I know that if somebody shot me, they'd be caught because they'd be on camera or caught through their phones. That might be kind of comforting. The problem is that we don't have that level of comfort, and we shouldn't have that level of comfort, because we know that being surveilled today means that we are subject to being potentially persecuted and prosecuted because we're in the wrong group, we angered the wrong person. Again, that the law has been weaponized. And that's what people have to understand. That government, the people inside of it, have finally figured out, in this freest nation in history, they have figured out how to weaponize the law, and they're using it. And they won't give it up voluntarily and unilaterally, because human history tells us that's not what people do. So we got to wake up. I don't know how to wake people up. I wish I had the answer for that. I guess the work that you do, these kinds of conversations with people, to some extent, you're doing God's work here. You're trying to let people know that their freedom's in jeopardy and they need to pay attention. Hopefully, at some point in time, the message heard often enough will start to get sticky, and people will remember.
Yeah, I think that too often.
Yeah, that's all.
Unless it happens to one of us or all of us, nobody really, it's not on the radar. So I think human nature is to not pay attention and care unless it affects you or people you care about.
Tom, you were
saying something, Tom?
Sorry, my connection's horrible today. I have to apologize to our viewers. Basically, yeah, I think what you said is important. Repetition of the message, getting credible data to support what you say is all very important. I think we can do it. It's just going to take some time.
Well, you're doing good work by having creating a forum where people can get information and hear this discussion. But I really don't know anybody who doesn't have a complaint. Anybody I know socially or professionally who don't have some sort of complaint about the arbitrariness or unfairness of some application or level of the law. Everybody, in other words, everybody's got a story. They've got a real anecdote that has impacted them or a member of our family. But the feeling is, what can I do about it? And the problem is, with regard to that feeling, is that each day we wait to do something about it, the answer to the question becomes not much. Because as this problem increases, there becomes less and less you can do about it, because the arbitrary use of law is going to stop you if you try. I see this ultimately, well, it has already. I mean, it's impacted our elections in the sense that, not because of the great Russian conspiracy that nobody can seem to prove after a year of investigating, but it certainly impacted our elections because of how we choose to enforce and not enforce voting registration requirements. So if, again, we have enough rules in every state to make sure that only people vote who are supposed to vote. And yet in many states, in many precincts, and there's been a lot of research done since the 2016 election, we know these things now. Problems in states like down in southern Florida, problems in New Hampshire and elsewhere. We know that in some cases, people just aren't following the rules. They aren't enforcing the existing laws because it doesn't suit them, because they've weaponized the law. So there's almost no aspect of daily life now where you can't find it having been altered artificially through the capriciousness of people in power. And it's not good. At some point in time, they're probably going to shut down this web show.
Yeah, that's a good point. Hopefully we get the information out before that happens.
Right, exactly. I know we're just about out of time, so I think maybe we made it, but we'll see if they pull it down off the web.
This has been an exceptional discussion, Brent. I just hope that the gravity of the message reaches people. You know, like they say, you can't make this poop up. Everything you said is, we can't, nobody with a sane mind can actually, the law has been weaponized. This is a fact. We see it. Sarah's seen it with a client recently. I've seen it with my own eyes. And I do hope things change. Is there anything else you would like to add, Sarah, before we could close the show?
I just want to say thank you to Brent. I mean, it's such a message that rings true with me every day practicing law, and I just think it's a message that's so important for people to understand. So thank you.
Thank you for having me and giving me a chance to share it. I think that there needs to be more shows like this. You need to keep doing what you're doing. I think you folks, I said it the last time I was here, I think your work is the legal version of being a prepper. And everybody laughs at preppers until there's a really bad storm or something that's cataclysmic and they're safe and you're not. And you're trying to give people a way to be legal preppers, to make sure that they're prepared if the arbitrariness of the law is turned on them. And that's really good work that you're doing, and it's really important. And I hope people take the necessary precautions that you try to teach them about.
Thank you very much for that, Brent. That's very, very flattering. And of course, like Sarah says, we love having you on the show. You know, we'll probably have you back again sometime, assuming they don't close our show down, like you said.
Assuming they don't close the show down. Yeah, all of us might be spending our evening in the pokey here, as they used to say. But otherwise, it was fun, and I would love to do it again.
Great. So once again, to our viewers, I'd like to say in closing, to catch our show fresh a month at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, or view it anytime afterward right here on our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe to our blog for informative monthly posts at oiyf.com/blog. And if you want to protect yourself to the fullest extent possible against our wildly corrupt judicial system, be sure to pick up a copy of our book, Odds in Your Favor. So once again, Brent, thank you for being on our show, and we look forward to having you again.
Thanks very much. Take good care.